Think about the last difficult conversation you had in English. Not a casual conversation, a difficult one where something real was at stake. A salary negotiation, a disagreement with your manager, a situation where you needed someone to change their mind, and you didn't know how. What did you do? If you're like most people, you did one of two things. You pushed harder, repeated your argument with more force, more words, more evidence. Or you gave in, agreed with something you didn't agree with just to end the discomfort. And neither worked. The harder you pushed, the more the other person pushed back. The moment you gave in, you felt like you had lost something you shouldn't have lost. There's a third option. And most people never find it because it goes against everything we were taught about negotiation, argument, and persuasion. Today I want to tell you about a man who spent 24 years inside the most dangerous conversations in the world. Bank robberies, kidnappings, hostage situations, negotiations where if he said the wrong word at the wrong moment, someone died. And in those 24 years, he discovered something that changed not just how professionals negotiate, but how every human being can communicate in English or in any language with more power and less conflict. His name is Chris Voss, former lead international kidnapping negotiator for the FBI, author of one of the most influential books on communication ever written, Never Split the Difference. And his central insight, the one that contradicts everything you learned in school about logic and persuasion, is this: people do not make decisions with their heads. They make decisions with their feelings, and then they use their heads to justify what their feelings already decided. This means that the most powerful thing you can do in any conversation is not make a better argument. It is make the other person feel heard, completely heard, not agreed with, heard. And then, from that moment of connection, everything becomes possible. By the end of this video, I will give you 4 of Chris Voss's techniques, translated directly into practical English phrases you can use starting today, in meetings, in negotiations, in difficult conversations with anyone who has something you need. Before I give you the techniques, I need you to understand one phrase, because this phrase is a key that unlocks everything else. The phrase is, that's right, not you're right, not I agree, not absolutely. That's right, 2 words. They sound the same. They mean completely different things. You're right is what people say when they want conversation to end, when they're tired of arguing, when they want peace more than truth. You know this because someone has said you're right to you, and you immediately knew they didn't mean it. It was capitulation dressed as agreement, and it solved nothing. That's right is different. It is what a person says when they feel completely understood, not just heard, understood. When your summary of their position is so accurate, so complete, so fair, that they can only say, yes, that is exactly it. That's right. Chris Voss says that that's right is a holy grail of negotiation. The moment someone says it, the entire dynamic of the conversation shifts. Their defenses come down. Their need to argue disappears. And they become, for the first time, genuinely open to what you have to say. Your job in every difficult conversation is not to get to yes. It is to get to that's right. And the 4 techniques I am about to give you are the tools to get there. Technique 1, mirror. This is the simplest technique in the book, and the one most immediately available to English learners at any level. Mirroring means repeating the last 2 or 3 words the other person said as a question, nothing more. That's it. They say, I just don't think this proposal is ready. You say, not ready? They say, there are concerns about the budget. You say, concerns about the budget? They say, I'm not sure this is the right time. You say, not the right time? What happens when you do this? The other person keeps talking. They explain. They elaborate. They reveal information they weren't planning to share. Because the mirror is not a challenge. It's an invitation. It says, I heard you. Tell me more. In English, this technique is especially powerful for language learners. Why? Because it requires almost no vocabulary. You are using their words, not yours. There is no grammar to worry about, no translation. You just take the last thing they said and reflect it back as a question. And the silence after the mirror, do not fill it. Let it work. The discomfort you feel in that silence is nothing compared to the information it is about to produce. Technique 2, label. A label is a statement that names what the other person is feeling, not what they're saying, what they're feeling underneath what they're saying. It always begins with one of three phrases. It seems like, it sounds like, it looks like. They say, I've sent 3 emails and nobody has responded. You say, it sounds like you feel like your concerns aren't being taken seriously. They say, we've been working on this for months and nothing has changed. You say, it seems like you're frustrated that the effort isn't showing results. They say, I don't know if we can trust this timeline. You say, it looks like you've been burned by timelines before. What does labeling do? It externalizes emotion. It takes the feeling that was invisible, driving the conversation from underneath, and puts it on the table where both people can see it. And when a feeling is named, something almost magical happens. It loses some of its power. The person feels understood. And instead of defending their feeling, they can now talk about it. Notice the structure. It seems like not you feel, never say, I think you feel, or you're clearly frustrated. That is analysis, not labeling. It seems like is soft. It is provisional. It gives the other person room to correct you if you're wrong, and they will still feel heard even in the correction. In English, this is one of the most advanced things a B1, B2 speaker can do in a real conversation. Not because the words are hard, they're simple, but because it requires you to listen differently, not for facts, for feelings, and then to name what you found out loud without flinching. Technique 3. The calibrated question. Chris Voss never asked yes or no questions in a negotiation. He asked open questions, questions that begin with what or how, questions that cannot be answered in a single word, questions that force the other person to think, to engage, to collaborate. He called these calibrated questions, not because the question is tricky, but because it is calibrated to open the conversation rather than close it. The most important calibrated questions in professional English. What would need to happen for this to work? How am I supposed to do that? What makes this difficult for you? How does that affect what we discuss? What would you need to feel comfortable moving forward? Look at how am I supposed to do that for a moment. This question sounds like a challenge, but it isn't. It is an honest request for help. It invites the other person to solve a problem with you, not for you. And it is extraordinarily effective in English because it uses simple language to open a complex conversation. Calibrated questions also give you time. In a difficult conversation in English, your brain is doing 2 things at once, processing the language and processing the situation. A calibrated question buys you the time to think. While the other person is answering, you are recovering, you are listening, you are preparing. The rule: when you do not know what to say next, ask a calibrated question, not be clever. To stay in the conversation, keep the other person talking, and give yourself time to understand. Technique 4, the accusation audit. This is a technique most people never use because it feels wrong before it works. And then when it works, they never forget it. Before a difficult conversation, Chris Voss would make a list, not of his arguments, not of his evidence, of every negative thing the other person might be thinking about him or his position, every criticism, every doubt, every accusation they might make. And then, before they could say any of those things, he would say them first. I know this might seem like I'm asking for something unreasonable. I realize you probably have concerns about whether this can actually be done. I know the timing on this is not ideal. I imagine you've heard this kind of proposal before, and it didn't work out. Why does this work? Because every one of those negative thoughts was already in the room. The other person was already thinking them. By naming them first, you remove their power. You show that you understand the situation completely, including the parts that are unflattering to you. And that level of honesty creates an immediate and almost involuntary trust. In English, the accusation audit is also a fluency signal. It shows not just that you can produce language, but that you can read a situation, understand multiple perspectives, and communicate with precision and emotional intelligence. That is advanced English, not vocabulary, not grammar. awareness. Let's use these together. Here is a real situation. You need to ask your manager for more time on a deadline. This is a conversation many of you face in English, in real jobs, every week. Without Voss, I need more time on project. There are some complications, and I don't think I can finish by Friday. With Voss, I know this might seem like I'm asking at the worst possible moment. Accusation audit. And I realize the Friday deadline was already pushed once. Label, I have 2 questions. What would it mean for the team if the report came in Monday instead of Friday? Calibrated question. And what would I need to do to make that work? Calibrated question. Same request. Completely different conversation. The first version announces a problem. The second version opens a collaboration. And the other person, your manager, feels not challenged but consulted, not blamed but trusted. That is the difference between communication and negotiation. And that difference in English is built entirely from simple phrases used with precision and intention. Your challenge for this week: take one difficult conversation you've been avoiding, in English or about to happen in English, and prepare it using the accusation audit. Write down every negative thing the other person might be thinking. Then open a conversation by naming 3 of them out loud first, and tell me in the comments, what conversation have you been avoiding? What is the accusation you are most afraid they will make? Write it below. I read every single one. If Chris Voss changed how you will approach your next difficult conversation in English, subscribe. Turn on the bell, because next week, we continue the series with a woman who used English not just to communicate, but to transform. A poet, a memoirist, a survivor who believed that the truth of your own story, told in your own voice, is the most powerful thing you can offer in any language. Maya Angelou, and a lesson she left for every person writing or speaking in a second language. Your story is not a weakness. It is your most powerful asset. Used correctly, it makes every word you say in English more credible, more human, and more unforgettable. Subscribe. Don't miss it. And until then, listen first. Label what you hear. Ask what you don't understand. Like Voss. I'll see you next week.